Okay, so this is going to bring us to a next couple of key terms that you're going to need to know. The first one is called the Berlin Blockade. As you could see with Berlin, the way it was divided up, you had this small little section in Western Berlin that was part of the Allied group, um, except it was surrounded by nothing but communism. So, because Stalin wanted all of Berlin, he wanted the entire capital city. He decided, because obviously the Allies weren't going to just hand him the western half of the city, he decided to institute what he called the Berlin Blockade. And basically, what he did was he cut off all ground transportation into Western Berlin, which is the only way at that time that the United States and the other Allied countries were getting the needed aid to the Western Berlin people, food, water, medical supplies, things of that nature to help keep them alive while this whole thing was going on. Um, and basically, what Stalin was trying to do was he was trying to hold all these people in Western Berlin hostage, hoping that the United States would eventually kind of give in because these people started to starve and medical problems started to mount, things of that nature, because they weren't getting addressed. Well, if you cut off the ground transportation, water's not an issue or a factor because it's not there. Now you have the Berlin airlift, which is going to quickly follow. And this is a pretty amazing effort on the part of the Allies. Basically, what you're going to be looking at here is they're going to fly in all the needed materials that they got to get in there: food, water, medical supplies, things of that nature. This is probably, without doubt, even to the modern day, probably the biggest, greatest humanitarian effort ever put into place. There were over 2.5 million people living in Western Berlin that needed the aid that the United States and other allies were giving them. Planes were going to fly in. Some of the statistics that we have on here, the whole thing lasted about 327 days. And in that time, there were over 278,000 flights. And basically, that breaks down. I know it's kind of hidden from you here, but it breaks down to about 850 flights per day, about 35 flights per hour. This is about every 2 minutes you have a plane landing. This is a very efficient system to get the aid that's needed. You can see these blue arrows. Planes would fly in one direction and fly out the other direction. Think of it like one-way roads. And this is what made this system so efficient in keeping these people alive in Western Berlin. And one of the greatest stories that I think came out of this was the story of Uncle Wiggly Wings. I know that sounds goofy. On the next slide, take a look at that video. It's a pretty inspirational, pretty cool video about a pilot and his efforts to try to bring Christmas joy and peace to the people of Western Berlin.